You're nothing but a fake in a cheap uniform, Carl sneers, slamming Rachel Morgan's phone into the pavement. Handcuffed and bleeding, Brigadier General Rachel Morgan kneels on Interstate 95, her eyes blazing with defiance as she warns two rogue cops of their impending doom. In a heart-stopping moment, a stranger's phone becomes her lifeline, connecting her to the Pentagon. Will one call turn the officers' careers upside down, or will Rachel's courage falter in the face of their brutality? This is a story of justice, resilience, and a woman who refuses to give up. Don't miss a second. Subscribe now to see our latest compelling stories and share in the comments where you're watching. Can Rachel turn the tables on her tormentors? What secrets lie hidden in the officer's past? Stay and find out, for the truth will silence you. The sun blazed over Interstate 95, its heat rippling the air above the cracked asphalt. Rachel Morgan eased her black sedan into the Marinelle gas station, the engine's hum fading into the cicada's drone. A brigadier general in the Pentagon's Strategic Command, she wore her military uniform, crisp but stripped of insignia for this unofficial trip. Her eyes, sharp yet weary, scanned the empty lot. She stepped out, the weight of a long mission pressing her shoulders, and reached for the gas pump. In her mind, her mother's voice echoed, "Patience is your sharpest weapon, Rachel." A single mother and nurse, Mama Morgan had raised her in a Chicago tenement, teaching her to stand tall against a world quick to judge her skin. Rachel's fingers brushed the pump's handle when a shadow fell across her. Two county patrol officers, Carl and Hank, emerged from their cruiser parked in the lot's corner. Carl, broad-shouldered with a sneer etched into his face, swaggered forward, his hand resting near his holster. Hank, leaner and twitchy, trailed behind, his laugh sharp as broken glass. Rachel's pulse quickened, but her face remained a mask of calm. She'd faced worse, hostile generals, skeptical subordinates, but something in Carl's gaze, cold and predatory, set her nerves alight. "Hey you," Carl barked, his voice cutting through the humid air. "Step away from the vehicle, now." Rachel turned slowly, her hands visible. "Officers," she said, her tone even, "I'm just refueling. Is there a problem?" Carl's eyes narrowed, raking over her uniform. "Problem? Yeah, you in that costume's a problem. Paperwork. Let's see it." Rachel's jaw tightened, but she reached into her jacket, producing her military ID. "Brigadier General Rachel Morgan, Department of Defense. My credentials." Carl snatched the ID, barely glancing at it before tossing it onto the hood of her car. "Brigadier General?" He scoffed, his voice dripping venom. "What's this, Halloween? You buy that getup online?" Hank chuckled, circling to her left. "Bet it's one of those knockoff surplus store deals. What's next? You gonna say you're the president?" Rachel's fingers curled, but her mother's words anchored her. "They'll try to break you. Don't give them the satisfaction." "Check the ID," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's valid. Run it through your system." Carl stepped closer, his breath sour with coffee and contempt. "Don't tell me how to do my job, sweetheart. We got a report. Suspicious vehicle. Matches yours. You're coming with us." Rachel's eyes flicked to the cruiser, then back to Carl. "No report justifies this. Verify my identity or let me go." Carl's face darkened, his ego pricked by her defiance. He grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the cruiser. "You don't give orders here. I do." Rachel stumbled but caught herself, her boots scraping the pavement. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the pain shooting through her arm. "That phone in my pocket. It's a direct line to the Pentagon. Let me make a call." Hank laughed, louder this time, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Pentagon? Lady, you're delusional." Carl's grip tightened, his knuckles whitening. "No calls. You're nobody out here." He reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone, a sleek, encrypted device issued by the DoD. His eyes glinted with malice as he held it up. This is your lifeline?" With a sneer, he smashed it against the pavement, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of glass. Rachel's breath caught, not from fear but from a surge of rage, surgical and cold. She remembered the academy, the whispers behind her back. "She's only here because of quotas. She'd clawed her way to General, proving them wrong with every step. Now this man thought he could reduce her to nothing. That was federal property, she said, her voice ablade. You just crossed a line you can't uncross. Carl's hand lashed out, striking her cheek with a crack that echoed across the lot. Rachel's head snapped to the side, blood pooling in her mouth. She staggered, the cuffs now biting into her wrists as Hank snapped them on. Pain flared, but she didn't cry out. Her mother's face flashed before her, tired, resolute, unyielding. They can't take your dignity unless you let them. Keep talking, Carl hissed, leaning close, his breath hot against her ear. One more word and you'll forget who you think you are. Rachel spat blood onto the pavement, her eyes locking onto his. You're wrong, officer. I know exactly who I am. And soon you'll know too. Hank shifted uneasily, glancing at the gathering crowd. Truckers, a cashier, a few locals drawn by the commotion. Carl, maybe we should check her ID, just to be sure. Carl rounded on him, his voice a growl. Sure? She's a fraud, Hank. Look at her, playing dress-up, thinking she's better than us. He shoved Rachel against the cruiser, her shoulder slamming into the metal. On your knees. Rachel's knees hit the asphalt, the cuffs cutting deeper. Humiliation burned, but she lifted her chin, her gaze piercing Carl's bravado. She thought of her mother's hands, calloused from night shifts, holding hers as a child. You're enough, Rachel. Always. Last chance, she said, her voice low, lethal. Let me go, or you'll lose everything. Carl laughed, but it was hollow, his eyes flickering with doubt. He turned to Hank, who was staring at the broken phone, his bravado crumbling. The crowd murmured, phones raised, capturing every word. Rachel's heart pounded, not with fear but with certainty. She was no victim. She was a general, a daughter, a force. And this was only the beginning. The asphalt burned beneath Rachel Morgan's knees, each jagged pebble digging into her skin like a silent accusation. Handcuffed, her wrists chafed raw by the metal, she knelt before the Marinil gas station, the taste of blood sharp in her mouth. The sun scorched Interstate 95, its glare glinting off the shattered remains of her Pentagon-issued phone, strewn across the pavement like a broken promise. Officer Carl loomed over her, his shadow a dark stain, his sneer twisting his face into something feral. You're nobody, he spat, his voice thick with contempt. Just another wannabe in a fake uniform. Rachel's chest tightened, not from fear, but from a fury she'd learned to leash long ago. Her mother's words etched into her soul held her steady. They'll try to strip you bare, Rachel, but your strength is in what they can't touch. A brigadier general in the Department of Defense, she'd faced battlefields of prejudice, skeptical colonels, whispered slurs in Pentagon halls. But this moment, this humiliation before a growing crowd, cut deeper. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, met Carl's. You're wrong, she said, her voice low, a blade sheathed in calm, and you'll pay for it. Hank, the wirier officer, shifted uneasily, his laugh faltering as he glanced at the onlookers. Truckers, a cashier, a mother clutching her child's hand. Their phones were out, red lights blinking, capturing every second. Carl, Hank muttered, his voice cracking. Maybe we check her ID, just to be safe. Carl rounded on him, his eyes blazing. Safe? She's a liar, Hank. Look at her, thinking she's better than us, throwing around general like it means something. He grabbed Rachel's chin, forcing her to look up. Say it again. Tell me who you are. Rachel's jaw clenched, but her gaze never wavered. She thought of her mother, working double shifts to buy her first books, whispering, You're enough, always. I'm Brigadier General Rachel Morgan, she said, each word deliberate, resonant. And that phone you destroyed? It's federal property. One call, and your badge is gone. Carl's hand twitched, his ego stung by her defiance. He leaned closer, his breath sour. One more word, and I swear you'll regret it, monkey. The slur landed like a whip, and the crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the heat. Rachel's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, endured worse, and survived. Her eyes burned into his, a silent vow. You will fall. Hank kicked the phone's wreckage, his bravado faltering. "No calls, lady. You're done." But his voice trembled, betraying a crack in his confidence. The crowd grew bolder, their whispers turning to shouts. "Let her go," called a trucker, his voice rough with indignation. Carl spun toward them, his hand on his holster. "Back off, all of you! This is police business!" But the air had shifted, the balance tipping. Rachel, still kneeling, felt it, a spark of hope amid the pain. She spoke again, her voice steady, lethal. "Last chance, Carl. Let me go, or you'll lose everything. Your badge, your freedom, your name." Carl laughed, but it was hollow, his eyes darting to Hank, who was now pale, sweat beading on his brow. "You hear that, Hank? She's threatening us. Some nobody in a costume." He shoved Rachel's shoulder, her body rocking but not breaking. "Stay down where you belong." Then a voice pierced the tension. "Use mine." A young woman, Sophie, barely 25, with fierce eyes behind thick glasses, sprinted from the crowd, clutching a phone like a weapon. Her curly hair bounced as she dodged Hank's outstretched arm. "Take it! Call whoever you need!" Carl lunged toward her. "Step back or you're next." But Jack, a grizzled veteran in a faded cap, stepped between them, his bulk a wall. "Touch her and you'll need backup," he growled, his voice low. Dangerous. The crowd surged closer, emboldened, their cameras unwavering. Sophie thrust the phone toward Rachel, her hands trembling but resolute. "I serve too," she said, her voice ringing. "I know what that uniform means." Rachel's eyes met hers, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. With difficulty, her cuffed hands raised, she took the phone, the screen unlocking under Sophie's touch. The crowd held its breath as Rachel dialed from memory, her fingers steady despite the pain. "Department of Defense, secure line," she said, her voice clear, commanding. "Brigadier General Rachel Morgan, code 4481 Lima. I'm illegally detained by county officers, Staff County, Interstate 95, exit 140, Marinil gas station. Hostile behavior, destruction of federal property, suspected racial profiling. Request immediate response, priority alpha." A hush fell, broken only by the faint crackle of the line. Carl froze, his face draining of color. Hank took a step back, his eyes wide as if the ground had shifted beneath him. She's bluffing," Hank stammered, but his voice was a thread unraveling. Rachel lowered the phone, her gaze locking onto Carl. "You feel that?" she said, her voice soft but seismic. "That's the clock ticking." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others filming with renewed fervor. Carl's hand twitched toward his gun, but Jack's stare pinned him in place. Sophie stood firm, her phone still in Rachel's grasp, a lifeline forged in courage. Rachel's knees ached, her wrists bled, but her spirit was unbroken. She thought of her mother standing tall against a world that tried to diminish her. "This is for you, Mama." The horizon shimmered, not with heat, but with the promise of justice. Carl and Hank stood silent, their bravado crumbling, unaware that the call had already set their fate in motion. Carl stood rooted to the asphalt of the Marinil gas station, his heart hammering like a war drum. The crowd's murmurs buzzed around him, their phone cameras glinting like 100 accusing eyes. Rachel Morgan, still kneeling, handcuffed, her face bloodied but unbowed, had just spoken into a stranger's phone. "Brigadier General Rachel Morgan, code 4481 Lima. Priority Alpha." Her words hung in the air, heavy as a guillotine. Carl's sneer faltered, his fingers twitching at his side. He wanted to laugh, to call it a bluff, but a cold sweat beaded on his neck. Hank, pale as death, stammered, "She's lying, right, Carl? It's a trick." But Carl's eyes were locked on Rachel's, her gaze a mirror reflecting every failure he'd buried deep. 20 years ago, Carl had been a different man, or so he told himself. A lanky recruit in a military reserve program, he dreamed of officers' bars, of commanding respect. Fort Bragg's training field stretched before him, the air thick with dust and ambition. But Carl was sloppy, his drills half-hearted, his attitude a spark in a powder keg. During a live-fire exercise, he'd ignored protocol, nearly injuring a squad mate. Captain Harris, a black officer with a voice like steel, had torn into him before the entire platoon. "You're not here to play hero, Private," Harris barked, his dark eyes piercing. "You're a liability. Shape up or ship out." The humiliation burned, not because of the words, but because of who spoke them. Carl, raised in a small town where whispers of superiority were gospel, couldn't stomach a black man, that black man, holding power over him. He saw Harris's rank as a fluke, a product of diversity quotas, not merit. When Carl failed the program's final test, his dreams of military glory crumbled. Harris's parting words haunted him. "You lack discipline, not talent. Fix that or you'll break yourself." Carl didn't fix it. He broke. Now standing over Rachel, Carl felt that old wound split open. She was Harris all over again. Confident, composed, a black woman daring to claim authority he'd never grasped. Her uniform, even without insignia, mocked him. Her calm defiance, even with blood on her lips, was a slap to his fragile ego. "She's nobody," he muttered, more to himself than Hank, but his voice cracked, betraying the lie. The crowd pressed closer, their shouts growing bolder. "Let her go!" a trucker bellowed. Sophie, the young woman who'd given Rachel the phone, stood defiant, her eyes blazing. Jack, the veteran, loomed like a sentinel, his presence a silent threat. Carl's hand hovered near his holster, his mind racing. He'd joined the county police to reclaim control, to be the one giving orders. For years, he'd wielded his badge like a club, targeting those he deemed out of place, drivers with the wrong skin, the wrong attitude. It fed his pride, numbed the sting of his past. But Rachel was different. Her words, priority alpha, carried a weight he couldn't dismiss. In his memory, another moment flared, a bar in his hometown, years after Fort Bragg. Carl, drunk and bitter, had ranted to a buddy about people like Harris stealing opportunities. The buddy, a cop, had clapped his shoulder. "Join the force, man. Out here, you make the rules." Carl did, and the power was intoxicating. He'd pull over cars on flimsy pretexts, his flashlight a spotlight for his grudges. A black lawyer, a Latina nurse, each stop was a chance to rewrite his story, to prove he was better. But Rachel wasn't cowering. She wasn't breaking. "You're bluffing," Carl growled, stepping closer to Rachel, his boots crunching the phone's wreckage. "No one's coming for you." But his voice wavered, and Rachel's eyes, steady as stone, saw through him. She didn't speak, but her silence was louder than any retort. A judgment, a sentence. Hank grabbed his arm, his voice a hiss. "Carl, what if she's real? That call, what if it's legit?" Carl shook him off, his face flushing. "Shut up, Hank. She's a fraud, just like the rest." But doubt gnawed at him. The report about a suspicious vehicle had been vague, a routine call from dispatch. He'd leapt at it, eager to flex his authority, to put this woman in her place. Now her words echoed Harris's, "Fix yourself or you'll break." He hadn't fixed anything. Rachel shifted, her knees aching, but her posture unyielding. She thought of her mother, scrubbing floors to buy her school books, whispering, "You're enough, Rachel." That strength surged through her now, a fire no cuff could douse. "You feel it, don't you?" she said, her voice soft but seismic. "The ground's shifting. You broke something you can't fix." Carl's hand twitched toward his gun, but Jack's low growl stopped him cold. "Don't," the veteran said, his eyes locked on Carl's. The crowd's cameras rolled, their lenses unblinking. Sophie clutched her phone, her knuckles white, as if willing Rachel's call to bear fruit. Hank's eyes darted to the horizon, where the highway shimmered, empty but ominous. In Carl's mind, Harris's face morphed into Rachel's. Both symbols of a world that had passed him by, a world where he was no longer the default, the king. His hatred, sown in that dusty field at Fort Bragg, had grown into this moment, this mistake. He wanted to scream, to strike her again, but her gaze held him captive. She was no victim. She was a general, and he was unraveling. "You'll regret this," Carl whispered, but the words were hollow, a plea to himself. Rachel's lips curved, not a smile but a promise. "No," she said. "You will." The air thickened, the crowd's voices rising, and Carl felt the first tremor of a reckoning he couldn't outrun. The air at the Marinil gas station crackled with tension, the crowd's murmurs a low hum against the oppressive heat of Interstate 95. Rachel Morgan knelt on the asphalt, her wrists raw from handcuffs, blood drying on her lips. Her call to the Department of Defense, Priority Alpha, still echoed in the silence, a fuse lit and burning. Officer Carl stood frozen, his sneer replaced by a flicker of dread, while Hank's eyes darted to the horizon, sweat staining his collar. Rachel's gaze, steady and unyielding, bore into them, her mother's voice anchoring her. Justice doesn't shout, Rachel. It speaks in truth. A brigadier general, she'd faced worse than these men. Hostile war rooms whispered doubts. But this moment, this public stripping of her dignity, demanded more than endurance. It demanded reckoning. The crowd, truckers, locals, Sophie with her phone, Jack the veteran, held their breath, cameras rolling. Carl's voice broke the stillness, brittle with bravado. "You're bluffing," he said, but his hand trembled, betraying the lie. "No one's coming for you." Rachel's lips curved, not a smile but a blade. "Keep telling yourself that," she said, her voice low, seismic. "The clock's ticking." Hank stepped back, his voice a hiss. "Carl, what if she's real? That call—" Carl cut him off, his face flushed. "Shut up, she's nothing." But the words rang hollow, drowned by the crowd's growing unrest. "Let her go!" a woman shouted, her child clinging to her side. Jack's eyes pinned Carl, a silent warning. Sophie stood firm, her courage a beacon. Rachel, still kneeling, felt their support like a pulse, but her focus remained on Carl, the man who'd called her monkey, who'd shattered her phone, who'd thought he could break her. Then the horizon shifted. 3 black SUVs, sleek and unmarked, appeared as if summoned from the heat's shimmer. They moved with surgical precision, tires whispering on asphalt, stopping in perfect unison. The crowd parted, a collective gasp rippling through them. Carl's hand twitched toward his holster, but Hank grabbed his arm. "Don't," he whispered, his voice cracking. Rachel's heart steadied, her mother's words rising again. "Truth is your shield." She knew what was coming. The SUV doors opened simultaneously, and 4 agents in gray suits stepped out, their movements crisp, their faces unreadable. No badges flashed, no sirens wailed. Their authority was in their silence, their presence a weight that crushed Carl's fading bravado. The lead agent, a tall man with eyes like flint, approached Rachel. "Brigadier General Morgan?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. "Yes," Rachel said, her chin lifting despite the pain in her knees. "I was coerced. Release me." The agent nodded, producing a small tool. With a metallic click, the cuffs fell away, clattering to the pavement. Rachel stood slowly, her legs trembling but her posture regal, the blood on her face a stark contrast to her uniform's crisp lines. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Rachel's eyes never left Carl and Hank. She rubbed her wrists, the red marks a map of their mistake, and thought of her mother who'd taught her to stand when the world wanted her to fall. "You," the lead agent said, turning to Carl, his tone ice. "Officer Carl Thompson, disarm. Now." He flashed a credential, a golden seal glinting for a heartbeat, Federal Protection Agency. "This woman is a senior member of the Pentagon Strategic Command. You've assaulted an active duty general." Carl's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no words coming. Hank dropped his baton, his hands shaking. We didn't know," he stammered, but the agent's glare silenced him. "You knew enough," he said, his voice a blade. "Your body cams recorded everything. Step back." The second agent approached Rachel, his tone softer. "General, are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" Rachel shook her head, her voice steady. "No. What I require is accountability." She glanced at Carl, then Hank, their faces crumbling under the weight of their actions. She could press charges now, end their careers with a word, but a deeper strategy took root. Her mother's wisdom guided her. "Let them feel the shadow before the strike." "I won't file a formal complaint," she said, her words deliberate. "Not yet." Carl blinked, confused, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Hank exhaled, but Rachel's next words cut deeper. I want you to live with it, she said, her voice low, lethal. Sleep tonight wondering when the hammer falls. Wonder if you'll wear that badge tomorrow or clean desks in a basement archive. The crowd roared, their approval a wave. Sophie's eyes shone with awe. Jack's nod a silent salute. The agents exchanged glances, one tapping a tablet, a red icon pulsing. Disciplinary protocol activated. Carl's jaw tightened, his bravado gone, replaced by a dawning terror. Hank's shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the pavement, where Rachel's blood still stained the asphalt. The lead agent spoke again, addressing the officers. You'll remain here. JAG units are en route. Preliminary charges, abuse of authority, racial profiling, assault on a federal officer will be read soon. He turned to Rachel. General, your vehicle is secure. Do you wish to depart? Rachel shook her head, her eyes on the horizon. I'll stay until they're secured, she said, her voice firm. She thought of her mother, working nights to give her a future, whispering, You're enough, Rachel. This wasn't just for her. It was for every soul who'd been diminished, dismissed. She stood taller, the weight of her rank a mantle, not a burden. Carl tried to speak, his voice a croak. We were just following procedure. But the lie withered under Rachel's gaze. Procedure? She said, her voice soft but devastating. You spat on me. You cuffed me. You broke me open. That's not procedure. That's you. The agents moved to flank Carl and Hank, their silence louder than any siren. The crowd's cheers faded, replaced by a reverent hush. Rachel stood, bloodied but unbroken, a general in every sense. Justice had arrived, not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of truth. Rachel Morgan's sedan glided onto Interstate 95, the Marinol gas station shrinking in her rearview mirror, a fading scar under the relentless sun. The federal agents had offered an escort, but she'd refused, her voice firm. I'd drive myself. Now alone, the hum of the engine was her only companion, the road stretching like a ribbon of possibility and pain. Her wrists, still marked by the handcuffs bite, ached as she gripped the wheel. Blood crusted her lip, a bitter reminder of Carl's blow, but her eyes, dark and resolute, burned with a fire no man could extinguish. A brigadier general in the Pentagon Strategic Command, she'd faced war rooms and prejudice. Yet the ordeal at the gas station, public, raw, steeped in hate, had cracked something deep within her. Not her strength, but her silence. The highway unfurled, its asphalt shimmering in the heat, and Rachel's mind churned. She saw her mother's face, etched with exhaustion, yet fierce with love, from their Chicago tenement days. They'll try to break you, Rachel, Mama Morgan had said, her hands calloused from nursing shifts, but your heart is your fortress. Rachel had been 10, her braids tight, her dreams bigger than the crumbling walls around her. She'd vowed to rise, to prove her worth in a world quick to dismiss a black girl from the South Side. That vow had carried her through West Point, through snide remarks in officers' clubs, through every door slammed in her face. But today, kneeling on that pavement, called Monkey by a man with a badge, she'd felt the weight of every battle she'd fought. Her breath hitched and she tightened her grip, the pain in her wrist grounding her. The radio was off, the silence a canvas for her thoughts. She remembered her first command, a logistics unit in Kuwait, where a white colonel had questioned her every order, his eyes saying what his words didn't. She'd outmaneuvered him, her strategies flawless, her promotion swift. Yet the victories never erased the doubt others cast on her skin. At the gas station, Carl's slap wasn't just physical. It was every whisper, every sneer, distilled into a single act. Rachel's chest ached, not from the bruise but from the truth. No rank could shield her from hate. The road curved and a memory surfaced, sharp as a blade. She was 22, a cadet, standing before Colonel Ellis, her mentor, a black woman who'd climbed the ranks in a man's world. Ellis had seen Rachel falter after a classmate's slur, her confidence shaken. Power isn't in their approval, Ellis had said, her voice like iron. It's in your silence, your work, your truth. Rachel had taken those words to heart, building a career on discipline, not rage. But now, driving through the haze, She wondered if silence had cost her too much. She'd held back at the gas station, refusing to scream, to beg, but the urge to unleash her fury had been a living thing, clawing at her restraint. A sign flashed by. Rest area, 10 miles, and Rachel's eyes stung. She blinked, but the tears came, hot and unbidden. She pulled onto the shoulder, the sedan idling as she pressed her forehead to the wheel. The sobs broke free, not from weakness, but from release, each one a shard of pain she'd carried too long. She saw her mother, dying in a hospital bed, her hand weak but firm in Rachel's. "You're my general," she'd whispered, her smile fading with her breath. Rachel had buried her grief in duty, rising to brigadier general, but today's ordeal had torn that wound open. Carl and Hank hadn't just attacked her, they'd attacked the girl who'd promised her mother she'd never bow. The tears slowed, and Rachel lifted her head, her reflection faint in the windshield. Bloodied, bruised, but unbroken. She thought of Sophie, the young woman who'd risked everything to hand her a phone, and Jack, the veteran whose stand had given her time. Their courage had fueled hers, a reminder that she wasn't alone. She'd made that call, priority alpha, not just for herself, but for every soul who'd been diminished, for every child like the one she'd been, dreaming beyond the world's limits. The agent's arrival, the cuffs falling away, had been Justice's first whisper, but Rachel knew the fight was far from over. She wiped her face, the blood smearing on her hand, and a fierce clarity settled in her bones. Her mother's voice returned, "You're enough, Rachel." She wasn't just a general. She was a daughter, a survivor, a force. The highway stretched ahead, a path she'd chosen long ago, paved with sacrifice and resolve. Carl and Hank would face their reckoning, but this moment was hers, a reclaiming of the strength she'd never lost. She started the engine, the sedan purring to life, and pulled back onto the road. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, and Rachel's heart steadied. She'd cried, not for defeat, but for the weight of carrying her mother's dreams, her own victories, and the pain of a world still learning to see her. The gas station was behind her, but its lesson lingered. Silence was her power, but so was her voice. She drove on, the horizon calling, her resolve aflame that no man could douse. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a vow renewed on the open road. The federal courtroom in Richmond was a crucible of silence, its oak-paneled walls absorbing the weight of anticipation. Rachel Morgan stood at the witness stand, her brigadier general's uniform immaculate, the gold stars on her shoulders gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her face, once bloodied at the Maronil gas station, was now a mask of resolve, though the faint scar on her lip whispered of that day's brutality. The gallery was packed. Journalists, activists, locals from Interstate 95, each eye fixed on her. Carl and Hank sat at the defense table, their uniforms replaced by ill-fitting suits, their faces hollow. Rachel's gaze met theirs, not with anger, but with a steady, unyielding truth. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Speak your truth, Rachel. It's louder than their lies." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Torres, paced before the stand. "General Morgan," she began, her voice clear, "please recount the events of that day at the Marinell gas station." Rachel's hands rested on the stand, her wrists still bearing faint marks from the cuffs. She spoke, her voice resonant, each word a stone in a foundation of justice. "I stopped to refuel after a mission. Officers Carl Thompson and Hank Reynolds approached, citing a vague report about a suspicious vehicle. They dismissed my military ID, mocked my rank, and called me a fraud. When I insisted they verify my identity, Officer Thompson struck me, cuffed me, and destroyed my Pentagon-issued phone, a federal asset." The gallery stirred, murmurs rippling. Carl shifted, his jaw tight, while Hank stared at the table, his hands trembling. Rachel continued, her tone unwavering. "They used racial slurs, forced me to kneel, and ignored my warnings. I told them one call would end their careers. They laughed, until I made that call." Torres held up a tablet displaying grainy footage from Sophie's phone. The screen showed Rachel, bloodied and cuffed, speaking into the device. "Brigadier General Rachel Morgan, Code 4481 Lima. Priority Alpha. The crowd's cheers from that day echoed faintly through the courtroom speakers. This call, Torres said, triggered an immediate federal response. Is that correct? Yes, Rachel said, her eyes flicking to Carl. It was no bluff. The defense attorney, a wiry man with a nervous tic, rose. General Morgan, isn't it possible the officers acted under pressure, believing you were a threat based on the report? Rachel's gaze hardened, but her voice remained calm, a blade sheathed in reason. A threat? I presented my ID. I offered verification. They chose to assault me, to degrade me, because of who they assumed I was, a black woman, unworthy of respect. That wasn't procedure. That was prejudice. The attorney faltered but pressed on. You sustained minor injuries. Could this be an overreaction to a misunderstanding? Rachel leaned forward, her presence commanding the room. Minor. I was struck, cuffed, and spat on. They called me monkey. But this isn't about my injuries. It's about a system that lets men like them wield power without accountability. I've faced this before, in the military, in life. Each time I stood taller. That day I stood for every person who's been silenced. The gallery erupted, the judge's gavel a sharp crack. Rachel's words hung heavy, a mirror to truths too long ignored. She thought of her mother, scrubbing floors to buy her books, whispering, "You're enough, Rachel." She thought of Colonel Ellis, her mentor, who taught her to wield truth like a weapon. This testimony wasn't just for her. It was for Sophie, for Jack, for every soul watching from the shadows of that gas station. Torres presented more evidence. Body cam footage from Carl and Hank, capturing their slurs, their violence. Sophie testified next, her voice steady, recounting her defiance in offering her phone. Jack, the veteran, spoke gruffly of his stand, his eyes meeting Rachel's with respect. The evidence was a tidal wave, unyielding and undeniable. Carl took the stand, his voice thin, defensive. We were under pressure, he said, avoiding Rachel's gaze. Dispatch reported a suspicious vehicle. I thought she was lying about her rank. It was a mistake. The prosecutor pounced. A mistake? You ignored her ID, destroyed federal property, and assaulted her. Was monkey a mistake too? Carl's face reddened, his words crumbling. Hank, called next, was worse. A broken man, his voice barely audible. I followed Carl, he mumbled. I didn't know. I'm sorry. His eyes sought Rachel's, pleading, but she looked through him, her expression not vengeful but sorrowful, a general mourning the fall of men undone by their own choices. The judge, a stern woman with gray-streaked hair, addressed Rachel. General, the prosecution seeks charges of assault, abuse of authority, and racial profiling. Do you wish to add a personal statement? Rachel stood, her uniform a symbol of her journey. I don't stand here for revenge, she said, her voice ringing clear. I stand for accountability. Carl and Hank didn't just attack me. They attacked every person who's been judged by their skin, their gender, their truth. I've fought for my place in a world that doubted me. I'll keep fighting, not with anger, but with evidence, with patience, with the law. Let this be a warning. No badge excuses hate. The gallery roared, the judge's gavel futile against the tide. Carl's head bowed, Hank's shoulders shook, their fates sealed by their own actions. Rachel stepped down, her heart heavy but unburdened. Her mother's voice returned. Truth is your sword, Rachel. She'd wielded it, not for destruction, but for clarity, for a world where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. Rachel Morgan's sedan rolled to a stop at the Marinil gas station, the familiar hum of Interstate 95, a quiet hymn under the morning sun. Months had passed since that searing day when she'd knelt, bloodied and cuffed, before rogue officers, Carl and Hank. Now the air felt lighter, the station transformed. A new sign stood proudly by the pumps. Safe zone, respect for all. Rachel stepped out, her brigadier general's uniform crisp, her scars faded but ever present beneath her skin. Her eyes, dark and resolute, traced the lot where her truth had sparked a reckoning. Her mother's voice, a constant guide, whispered, "You've done enough, Rachel, but enough is never the end." The trial's verdict still echoed in her mind. Carl, sentenced to 5 years for assault and abuse of authority, had sat stone-faced as the gavel fell. Hank, his accomplice, received 2 years, his tearful apology drowned by the courtroom's judgment. The Staff County Sheriff's Department, exposed by body cam footage and Sophie's video, faced a federal overhaul, its culture of bias laid bare. Rachel had become a symbol, her story splashed across headlines. General defies injustice. Yet she shunned the spotlight, returning to her Pentagon duties, her focus on strategy, not fame. The weight of her rank was not in glory, but in responsibility. To her mother's memory, to those who'd stood with her, to a world still learning to listen. She walked toward the gas station's storefront, her boots steady on the asphalt where she'd once knelt. The crowd from that day, Sophie, Jack, the truckers, had dispersed, but their courage lingered. A letter from Sophie, now a law student, had arrived weeks ago, its words etched in Rachel's heart. "You showed me justice isn't a dream. I'm studying to defend those like you." Rachel had read it under the dim light of her office, a smile breaking through her stoic facade. Sophie's resolve was a seed planted in that moment when she'd thrust her phone forward, defying Carl's threats. It was a legacy Rachel hadn't sought but now cherished. The station's cashier, a young man with a shy grin, nodded as she entered. "General Morgan?" he asked, recognition lighting his eyes. "Heard about you. This place ain't the same since, you know." Rachel offered a small smile, her fingers brushing the counter where she'd once stood, unnoticed before Carl's shadow fell. "It's better," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of truth. She bought a coffee, the mundane act grounding her, a reminder that heroes were human too. Outside, Rachel paused by the sign, its bold letters a testament to change. She remembered her childhood, clutching her mother's hand in a Chicago alley, promising to make her proud. "I'll do what's right, Mama, no matter how hard." At 10, she hadn't known the cost. West Point's grueling nights, the military's veiled slurs, the gas station's public shame. But she'd kept that vow, each step a brick in a path others could follow. Her eyes stung, not with sorrow but with clarity. She'd cried on the highway months ago, releasing a lifetime's pain. But today she stood whole, her mother's strength woven into her bones. A memory surfaced, her mother's hospital bed, the beep of machines fading as she squeezed Rachel's hand. "You're my general," she'd whispered, her smile eternal. Rachel had buried her grief in duty, rising through ranks, proving her worth. But the gas station had taught her something new. Justice wasn't just her fight. It was collective, sparked by Sophie's courage, Jack's stand, the crowd's cameras. She'd called Priority Alpha not for herself, but for every soul diminished by hate, every child dreaming beyond their circumstances. The station buzzed with life, families refueling, a trucker chatting with the cashier. No trace of the tension that once choked this place. Rachel sipped her coffee, its warmth steadying her. She thought of Carl, now in a cell, his hatred a chain he'd forged himself. Hank, broken by his own complicity, had pleaded for mercy, but Rachel's gaze at the trial had offered none. Only pity for men who'd chosen to fall. Their punishment was just, but her victory was in the change they'd unwittingly catalyzed. A safer highway, a reformed department, a generation inspired. A young girl, maybe 8, ran past, her laughter bright. She stopped, staring at Rachel's uniform, her eyes wide. "Are you a soldier?" she asked, her voice a spark. Rachel knelt, her heart swelling. "I'm a general," she said, her tone gentle, "and you can be anything." The girl grinned, racing back to her mother, who nodded at Rachel, a silent thank you. Rachel stood, her chest tight with purpose. This was her legacy, not headlines but moments, ripples spreading beyond her sight. She returned to her sedan, the horizon calling. The sign's words, respect for all, felt like a vow renewed, not just hers but the community's. Sophie's letter, tucked in her glove box, was a promise of tomorrow. Rachel started the engine, the road ahead a canvas of possibility. Her mother's voice rang clear. "You're enough, Rachel." She'd fought, not with rage, but with truth, and won more than justice. She'd sown hope. As the gas station faded behind her, Rachel drove on, her heart light, her legacy a highway where no one would kneel again. What did Rachel Morgan's journey stir in you? Her unyielding stand against injustice, her quiet strength. How does it resonate in your heart? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share what moved you and let us know where you're listening from. Thank you for joining us on this powerful ride along Interstate 95, for standing with Rachel, Sophie, and every voice that dares to rise. Your support fuels these stories, and we're grateful for every moment you've shared with us. Stay tuned for more tales of courage and truth. Until then, keep the highway open and your spirit bold. We'll see you soon.